Good evening, everyone. It's 5:32, so we're going to go ahead and get started now that we have a quorum present. We're going to go ahead and start off with the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you. We're going to go ahead, and I need to have a motion to approve the agenda for tonight.
I motion to approve the agenda.
Second.
Thank you. And we also need to have an approval of the minutes from the joint meeting with the County Council from April 21st.
I move to approve the minutes from the county council meeting on the May 21st. Sorry, April 21st.
Second.
Thank you. All right, so the first item on our agenda tonight is cell phone updates with Ms. Clausen and Mr. Stoker. So I'm going to go ahead and let them take it away.
Well, hi, everybody. How are you?
Good evening.
Good. Do we get to control this? All right, cool.
So we have put together some information for you, both from Easton Middle as well as the St. Michael's Middle High campus. The main pieces of the impact at Easton Middle, the year 2 of our continued Yonder pouches, they have set a standard for keeping cell phones away throughout the school day. Clear expectations and consistent enforcement of consequences when violations occur also support the efforts. Students know that if phones are out, exactly what's going to happen. We keep documentation on a spreadsheet that administration keeps track of, and so the expectations are clear, the consequences are clear. The pouches have significantly reduced the in-the-moment cyberbullying that we were seeing previously, and also social media drama. They are not on those phones, so those kinds of things are not presenting during the school day. And the third main impact is, while consistent use of the pouches remains a goal, we are successfully keeping them out of sight. Removing these digital distractions has led to measurable increase in face-to-face interactions with students. And our teachers are saying that it has significantly reduced disruption within the classroom.
And we're seeing a lot of similar things at St. Michael's as well. They are definitely an effective deterrent. Middle school students know that those phones have to be in pouches, so they know that they cannot be visible anywhere else. And I'd say there's pretty quick follow-up if they are out. So they have definitely significantly reduced the classroom disruptions. And even for our middle school students, the hallway disruptions, it's certainly impacted, I think, to create a more focused learning environment. My teachers definitely second that as well. The implementation of a consistent school-wide process for securing phones has definitely made the expectations clear for students. They know exactly where the line is, and it's also, I think, improved consistency with enforcement for teachers. They also, it's not an arguing anymore or, a back and forth with students. It's just really created a clear line of what the expectation is, where those phones need to be during instruction when they walk into the building to when they walk out of the building. And so that has really, I think, clarified the messaging for teachers, and they don't have to worry about arguing with students anymore about it or where they need to be. It's just definitely streamlined the process, I would say. Certainly the system's not perfect. It definitely is taxing on supervision for making sure that they're always secure. There's always a lot of different answers about I don't have a phone or I didn't bring it today. So there's always going to have to kind of be that continued refinement. Middle schoolers are exceptional at finding loopholes, as some of you certainly know firsthand. And so that always there's always going to have to be a review process. What can we do better? What do we need to take a second look at as far as those things? So it's always refining the process.
And then Mr. Stoker and I gave each of our staffs a survey. And so for Easton Middle School, you'll see that 95% of the staff agree that there's positive impact on academics and behavior. 82% has observed increased class participation within the classroom instruction. 78% observed improved active listening, and 88% a greater respect for peers and teachers.
And then similarly, we saw the same, obviously a little bit smaller staff, but 100% agreed that they're definitely seeing an impact on the behavior and the academics in the classroom for our middle school students. They felt as though 86% of our teachers felt like there was an increase in class participation, and even another 86% on improved active listening. They also felt like, too, it was just a greater, respect for teachers and their peers. Again, I think eliminating the arguments that have to happen about putting the phones away, the constant reminders and the arguments that come up from that, has been a piece of it. I was kind of mystified. Only 14% thought it improved classroom community, but they felt like there was already great classroom community, so it wasn't really a factor in the first place. So I was like, all right, well, so at least that was going for us. Just to share, I have a little bit of a different context, having middle schoolers with the Yonder pouches and then high schoolers without the Yonder pouches. And my high school teachers would probably say it would be awesome if they had them too. They definitely see the difference with our middle school students versus our high school students. So we implemented the Yonder pouches the very beginning of November. So we did have a little bit of data with our middle schoolers without it, and then our high schoolers all year. And I think a really big component is there's been a 78% reduction in infractions. We've only had 16. Of course, this was a couple, weeks ago when we were putting together the data. I'm sure there's some more because we've also done some Yonder checks between then. So my numbers have gone up. But anyway, there was only 16 infractions on our middle school from the time we started till about 2 weeks ago, which is compared to 98 for our high schoolers. So significantly more infractions with them having the cell phones out in class. And I would say my high school teachers are just as diligent about if they see a cell phone, they call the office, it gets turned in. We go through all of that same process we have for the high schoolers and the middle schoolers. So we definitely, and even as far as our grade levels, sorry, you'll have to ignore, I kind of copied the information for the 31 in the high school. It does not, but if you look, we've had an 89% reduction in those infractions, so only 31 since for 8th grade, 24, and then 18 for 6th grade. So we, again, compared to after that, we've only had 9 in 8th grade for infractions after the Yonder pouch, 5 in 7th, and only 2 in 6th grade. So those have gone up a little bit, but still not much compared to when they did not have the Yonder pouches from there. So definitely seeing a positive impact with it. There's definitely barriers to success with it in any system. And I know we both would probably share with you the number one is parental resistance. There's a lot of concerns regarding emergency communication, access to their kids, the perceived infringement on student and family autonomy. I didn't pick this for my kid. They're not following that. I mean, we get some pretty outright, just in our face comments about, you're not telling us what to do, and my kid will never put that in the pouch.
What percentage of parents do you think are giving you that pushback? Is it 5%, 20%, like rough guess?
I think it's really hard to put a number on it. I mean, obviously, when the kids that do get the cell phone infractions when you're calling home, it's more than common to get those responses from parents. Some of them, I mean, is probably a fair amount of passive-aggressive responses to of, okay, thank you for the information, and then quietly tells their kid, you don't need to put it in your Yonder pouch.
We haven't had, a significant number of parents coming in and saying, we're not doing this, but the underlying messaging to the children is you don't have to follow that rule. Not everybody.
Yeah, and I would say, honestly, kids are pretty honest with us, and they'll flat out say, hey, my parents said I'm not to put it in there. And I've definitely seen for a handful of kids, it puts them in a really difficult place. Like they want to follow the rules and they want to do the right thing, but they also don't want to go against their parents, which I totally get and understand, you know? So it
Do
is
any of these
difficult.
kids have like the diabetes where they're using their cell phone? And then are any of those parents pushing back?
So children that have medical needs have a different kind of pouch, and it's a Velcro pouch. So they have accessibility to the phone for when they need it for medical issues. And they're not.
And that's a very small percentage of students.
Them also potentially in that number mix, do you have any idea?
As far as like infractions.
Out and still fiddling with it in front of the class and saying, hey, I have mine, but you don't.
And I'll be honest, it's so few kids, but those kids have had to use those for medical monitoring for the bulk of their life, that they're actually really good about,
Very
it stays put
responsible.
away, like, they actually usually have less
I know the
infractions
school
or
nurses
issues.
have access to it on the iPad, so I still personally don't feel that they're maybe necessary. I could be wrong. I don't know the extent of the diabetes management for some of these kids, but
I will say that I don't want to speak out of turn, but a lot of times their phone and their monitoring is a little bit closer to the device, so it gives them the accurate readings. The nurse can certainly see that, but sometimes there's disruptions in, it's technology, so it's not always accurate, but, my experience with those kiddos is they are pretty on top of taking care of things and making sure it's not a disruption.
and how about Apple Watches? I hear that that's the next challenge.
From the beginning, we've always, like, your earbuds, your phone, and your smartwatches go in the Yonder pouch. So they've kind of had that understanding that all of that goes in there. And we just treat it as any of those things are out in class for our middle schoolers. It's just a technology infraction, so it follows the same process.
We have fewer of those that we encounter.
Yeah, and so the other barrier too is just the staffing constraints. There's always a continuous need for high visibility supervision at all the entrances, making sure that kids, are putting them in and following through. It definitely puts a lot on our teachers to make sure every kid, and, they're going to give them different stories. Oh, I don't have my phone, or I left my pouch, or, all the different excuses, but.
And we're still trying to get students in their classes and
correct.
ready for their lessons and
Right.
learning and all of the, all of that. So,
Yep.
do you have any other questions for us?
How much are you seeing kids just not closing the pouch and not sealing the pouch? I've heard stories that some children just don't close them up properly, or I've also heard stories of decoy phones.
We had a few decoy phones at the beginning. I think that you will find that many are putting the phone in the pouch and putting it in the iPad case, potentially not closing them, locking them.
You may have a unique perspective on this, but I'm sure you've heard of statewide legislation that's pending for bell-to-bell cell phone bans.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering how you would foresee managing something like that at the high school level.
Being at Easton Middle School last year and kind of helping with that rollout, got to see it at the middle school level there, and then, rolling it out at St. Michael's, it's definitely very different dealing with our high schoolers. There's other elements that we've kind of had to learn and navigate, even when it comes to our follow-up for consequences with that phone infraction. Particularly, I've got sophomores and juniors and seniors that are leaving to go, to work, that are going to apprenticeships, that are going to internships. They're trying to communicate with bosses. And so we try to kind of hold that in balance and really explain to them of like, look, you are growing, you are older. When you are in the classroom, that cannot be out. It cannot be a distraction for you. I don't want to take a kid's phone away. One of our follow-ups is that they have to turn it into the office after the first infraction. It turns into a parent pickup. The parent has to come back in and pick up that phone. We've had to adjust that for some of our kids that drive just because, you know, I don't want a kid getting a flat tire or getting in a car accident and not being able to call emergency services or let a parent know they're going to be late or something like that. So we've kind of navigated that piece to how that looks like. But I think that there would definitely be some challenges for the securing of bell-to-bell for our high schoolers. They definitely have a far greater attachment to the phones, you know, which is kind of, look, I'll just flat out say it. I'm real honest, right? It's, you know, if you have someone who's addicted to something and go, well, if you have a little bit of it, that's okay. And just as long as you're not having it during these times and these times. Once you get a little bit of exposure, so they might keep it away for one class, but then they're in the hallway and there's a lot of this, or looking at the phones because they can still have them out. And then it's hard when they go into a class that they're still getting buzzes and communication and things that are just naturally going to disrupt. It doesn't matter. If your phone buzzes and you feel it or you know it, your just natural tendency is to want to see what's going on or look on it. And that's just a hard reality for a lot of our high schoolers. So it would definitely be a bit of a hurdle for them to get used to securing it away the entirety of the school day. But
Do you think that, now I don't know the board's pleasure of this, we haven't talked about
Sure,
voting
sure.
on it, but do you think that the Yonder pouch in the high school, for example, would help you roll something like that out, or do you think it would not?
I think seeing
For putting you on the spot.
No, you're fine. No, I think that it is definitely shown it is a quality deterrent of having that line. You know, I will say that though we may have more infractions on the high school level, I don't know if it's necessarily a pouch that would become the deterrent so much as because they're allowed access during time in the cafeteria and because they can use it in the hallways, that if that's more of the issue because they're just used to being able to have that access throughout the day versus if you're just saying, look, from the start of the day until you leave the building, whenever that is, if you leave earlier till the end of the day, if that would be enough of a deterrent knowing what the follow-up is. I will say that our high schoolers are just as respectful in following through with the process. If it's out, it's out. They follow the same progressive discipline that our middle schoolers do. So like I've said, where we've had to navigate that is just how they get their phone at the end of the day, or, you know, so we've adapted it where some of them, they come in and they have to turn in their phone when they're there for a period of time to the front office. But they understand it was also out during class. So, you know, the consequence, you know, certainly matches that.
Do you think having a Yonder pouch instead of per student, but in the classroom would be a more realistic option if it's something we can afford to do? So whereas the teachers have the Yonder pouch, the student comes in, they put the Yonder pouch in, they put the cell phone and devices in the Yonder pouch during that class. They get it back at the end of class. They can be on it in the hall. They go in the next class. The next teacher has Yonder pouches. Same thing. Do you understand what I'm saying?
I think you're gonna run into cutting instructional time down unless it becomes second nature
Right. Yeah.
and consistent. Because then you're asking a student to place it in the pouch with the classroom teacher right there. You may have that power struggle.
And then you have that problem of going in the hall, I mean, at least in the middle school, in the hallway, people buzzing, hey, meet me here, filming fights that we've seen, you know, not communicating, that whole thing of not doing what you want to do in the school. And if they know that they have this bell to bell and it can't be out, I mean, I think you just rip the Band-Aid off and cold turkey.
I will say, when the phones are away from bell to bell, there's far more engagement with students. You see them, you know, my middle schoolers talk to one another in the hallway. There's less social media drama or, you know, looking and dealing with those things throughout the day. You know, I know from last year, and I would even say this year for us, a lot of times where we have social media drama or things popping up is because it's happened outside of school.
And it's filtering in.
And then it filters into school. 'Cause school's the one place where everybody sees everybody, you know what I mean? But it's not necessarily happening during the school day, which is a huge benefit. And even you walk into the cafeteria with my middle schoolers, they're talking to one another, they're having conversations, you know.
It's
like
loud.
It is loud,
Come
you
on
know.
by.
But yeah, but those are things that you want to see, that kind of social development. You know, that's not necessarily the case, you know, if you were to come into our high school cafeteria.
I will say several of us had an opportunity to do a walkthrough at Easton Middle a couple weeks ago, and we went in, probably 10 different classrooms, and I did not see a single phone or headphone in any of those classrooms. So I was very happy to see that.
Right. Well, they definitely do their job as being a deterrent, that's for sure.
Do we want to talk about moving forward with a policy on redoing our cell phone policy at this point? Or do you want to discuss that Wednesday? Anybody else have any more questions for Mrs. Clausen or Mr. Stoker? Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Okay, the next item on our agenda tonight is food service bid.
Good evening, Board and Dr. Pepakai. I am here as a part of the team for the food service. Hello, we're presenting to the Board tonight the results of our search from the Food Services Management Company, which you will see abbreviated as FSMC in our presentation. I'm going to provide a bit of background for context and explain the process before I introduce you to the selection committee, who will handle the rest of the presentation. Every 5 years, a minimum, every 5 years at a minimum, an LEA who contracts with an outside vendor to provide their meals to students must rebid the contract. This year marks the 5th year on our current contract with the Sodexo, so we were required to go through this proposal process. The contract for the new food services management will begin on July 1st and will start with our summer food service program and move right into the National School Lunch Program when we return in August. We will also operate the Child and Adult Care Food Program during the school year, which are the weeknight dinners we provide at Easton Elementary School to our children participating in the after-school programming.
The process started back in late January with the development of an RFP, or request for proposals. And this process took about a month because it required gathering a lot of statistics about the students we serve and the meals we serve at each school. How many are paid for by students, how many meals are free, how many are paid at the reduced rate. So we gathered that information about our participation, which we found has been on the low side compared to national statistics. And we needed to align our RFP with the requirements set forth by the USDA and Maryland State Department of Education over this type of procurement. So some of the elements of the RFP were requirements for a guarantee from the food service management company of an amount of profit to be guaranteed or generated by the program, and requirement for a performance bond, a 21-day menu for lunch and for breakfast for the National School Lunch Program and for the summer program, and a menu for the dinner program. They needed to provide a detailed staffing plan by building with hourly wages and hours to be scheduled. And we provided a very detailed grading rubric broken into 8 different sections for them to understand as they were preparing their proposals. The proposal was developed with input from MSDE's Office of School and Community Nutrition, and they took about 3 weeks to review our draft and lots of back and forth before approving it for release. Following a vote by the board on the contract award on Wednesday night, MSDE will have final review over that contract and final approval authority before we can sign the contract. As you can see from the timeline, after the proposal was approved for release, we held a proposal conference and invited potential bidders to come and do a walkthrough of 7 of our 8 cafeteria kitchens. Then we had a pretty tight turnaround during which companies worked on their proposals. They asked us follow-up questions. We responded back to them with answers or the results of any research we needed to do. The team took the better part of a week to review the proposals individually, and then we spent a full day together comparing our impressions and making analysis, figuring out our questions, and having a virtual interview with each of the companies that responded to address our questions. Last week, we invited the responding companies to present a tasting menu to us, which was scored as part of the proposal process. They all came with some very impressive offerings and teams of professionals. And after that tasting round, the selection committee completed its scoring, and we reviewed our overall scores to ensure we were in agreement with our final recommendation. So who is the selection committee? Remember the U.S. men's basketball team for 1992 Summer Olympics, known as the Dream Team? Okay, this is the Dream Team, okay? So why don't you guys make your way up to the podium, if you will. Dr. Horsey lent her skills in the area of human resources, contract review, and from the lens of being a building administrator in her past service. Mrs. Brown and Mr. Candle brought not only their culinary expertise, but also their understanding of students' taste and what students like to eat. Ms. Banning and Ms. Salisbury, who's not here with us tonight, have responsibility for the day-to-day administration of our food service operations from our side, from the TCPS side. So they process farms applications. They do the monthly claims for reimbursements. They reconcile the banking, and they perform annual verification of our farms forms. They inspect every single site a minimum of 3 times a year. So that's about 30 visits annually. They're in our cafeterias a lot, observing what's going on. They're observing breakfast in the classrooms, summer meals and dinners, as well as lunch at every building. So I'll pass this over to Lynn Banning.
Hi. We received proposals from our current food service management company, which is Sodexo, as well as 2 other companies. We spoke with Aramark and Whitson's. All 3 presenting have a very strong presence in the K-12 school meals arena. Once our proposals were received, each of our team members began reviewing the proposals independently. The goal was to evaluate the proposals against the criteria in the RFP and the required documents each company had submitted. These are the criteria we used in our grading rubric, and we will go through each section briefly next. Okay. The first area was the financial guarantee provided. Basically, each company named a dollar amount that they're willing to guarantee we will make in an annual profit based on the meals they project selling, less the management fee they would charge us. If for some reason at the end of the year we have not made that much money, they will cut a check for the difference. We operate under the same management now with Sodexo. Our current guarantee with Sodexo is $302,340. The guarantee is needed to cover the cost of a portion of salaries charged to food services, which covers a portion for myself, Jen Salisbury, and Sarah Jones, as well as the repairs to our kitchen equipment, our cooking fuel, and other miscellaneous costs. Points were awarded for exceeding the minimum guarantee we needed. More points were awarded based on the highest guarantee. Aramark and Whitson's guarantee were so close that under the grading rubric, they both qualified for the maximum number of points. Sodexo was in 3rd place and received the fewest points.
All right. Experience and references. The team evaluated how each company would gather quantitative and qualitative feedback and what they would do with that information. How would they get students' input? How will they measure success? Also, what training would staff receive? All teams promised the necessary food safety training, taking it up a notch to provide ServSafe certification. They also planned additional cooking trainings. The team felt Aramark had the most detailed training plan and transition plan for existing staff to move over to their new operations. Service capabilities. We considered the experience of all of the proposers. We determined that all had the necessary experience operating in a K-12 program. When we looked at the menus they submitted, we noted that Aramark and Whitson had good variety and a significant amount of from-scratch cooking. Sodexo's menu also reflected new offerings and more scratch cooking under a new brand that they were rolling out this next year. One of the things we paid particular attention to was the breakfast items in each menu because with free breakfast in the classroom, we are not currently serving as many meals as we should. Aramark and Whitson were judged to have more appealing menus. Financial conditions and business practices. There was very little differentiation in the financial conditions of the three companies. All are large, financially healthy companies that operate nationally. Aramark had a few employee benefits, such as free college for employees without any obligation to continue working for them, which earned them a few extra points.
For personnel management, in this area, we looked at the staffing plan for each location or whether or not the incumbent companies plan to offer employment to our current staff and what programs they have in place to hire and retrain staff and how they will fill openings when they're down staff or there's vacancies. The next part is accounting and reporting. Our main concern here is that the company could, provide the reporting we need to claim our meal reimbursements from the USDA, and that they were familiar with the point-of-sale system that we currently have in our cafeteria, and that our students use to purchase. Each company had an extensive use of Mosaic and our system. However, Aramark actually had a software add-on that integrates with their software and our software so that information can be shared back and forth.
Promotion of food service. We kept hearing about this LTO. We weren't really sure what that meant, but all three companies offered limited time offerings, and they wanted the students to try some new and different exciting menus, so they would offer them for a short time and see how they went over. They showed us items on their current menus that used to be limited offer, and now they are on there as a regular item. Other marketing was done to try to generate excitement around lunch and breakfast. We found that Aramark had a very detailed schedule, not only of the limited time offers, but also several national holidays like National Pancake Day and many holidays, and they incorporated many of those into their menus, and probably a little bit more than the other companies. Okay, now we got to the food tasting. This was by far the most fun, maybe the most difficult too, the most fun part of this process. We asked each of the companies to cook for us and serve us the items that they would serve to students. We were really adamant about what they would serve to students. So then we tasted them and considered several different things. First, presentation. We always tell our students, if it doesn't look good, you're not going to think it tastes good. So presentation was very important as to how appetizing everything looked, how colorful it was, did it match the description that they gave you on the menu. Then, of course, flavor. You can't eliminate that. How did it taste? Was it seasoned well? Texture. If it was supposed to be crispy, was it crispy? If it was supposed to be creamy, was it creamy? Etc. Was it tender? And on the opposite of that, was it fresh or was it a little rubbery or dry? So we had all those things in our mind as we were tasting. Then temperature. If it was supposed to be hot, was it really served hot, and vice versa? If cold, was it really served cold? Culturally appropriate and dietary appropriate. Will it meet the cultural needs of our students and diversity? Are there options for our vegetarians, our vegans, our gluten-free gals and guys? And finally, we tried to determine the likelihood of student acceptance. Some of the dishes were a bit far out, and knowing and dealing with students every day, we thought maybe they would not ultimately be received so well. It was a very tough area to score, and each team brought members of their senior management, their chefs, their operations managers. They rolled out the red carpet for us. They brought breakfast and lunch items and showed a whole lot of creativity. Ultimately, we felt that Aramark had the best menu offerings that students would like, including vegetarian, vegan, and gluten-free options.
To our overall grand total scores for each company. Aramark was awarded by the selection committee a total of 292 points, Sodexo 248 points, and Whitson's 272 points. Those scores put Aramark in first place, Whitson in second, and Sodexo in third. Each of the 6 members of the selection committee rated the teams in that order, so our recommendation is truly unanimous. Thus, our recommendation is we award a 1-year contract with the possibility of 4 one-year extensions to Aramark, effective July 1 of 2026. This was a long, thoughtful process of serious deliberation. We recognize this will be a big change for our students and for the staff of Sodexo who work in our school systems. Should the board vote on Wednesday to accept Aramark as the next contractor, Aramark is ready to move forward this week by holding a town hall with current food service staff to invite them to work with Aramark if they would like. This contract award will be coming up for a vote on Wednesday, and we're here to answer your questions.
How will that affect our little Sodexo cooking thing we have every year? Will Aramark do the same or something similar?
Aramark, a couple of things that impressed us about Aramark, they do have a cooking competition. The one they proposed to us was currently aimed more at secondary students, and chime in here if I'm telling anything out of turn. We mentioned to them that we really found the elementary program very successful, and they seemed open to, switching or continuing or possibly doing both. I think one of the things we really liked about Aramark and about Whitson's was both of those teams, both of those companies were willing to work with our culinary students in terms of having them actually work in the cafeterias, possibly helping with, what's it called? Starts with an A, where you send a kid out to work. Thank you, and apprenticeships, those kinds of things. So they seemed very into that concept. Yeah. To tell any fibs.
So for the staff that's currently working with Sodexo, how will they be impacted in terms of salary? I'm hearing that they will be offered similar positions with Aramark. Is that
Right,
But
so-
how will they be impacted?
Great que-
Salary, benefits, and other aspects.
Great question. What we found in looking at the benefits was across the 3 companies, they were pretty generic and they were pretty similar benefits-wise, with the exception that Aramark had that college tuition plan, which we really liked. In terms of salaries, Aramark is poised to give them a 3% increase or 3.5% increase right away. I don't remember the exact amount, but that was effective July 1. And then their history, their pattern of practice is to give a raise every January 1st based on CPI increases.
So the scholarship that they offer to their current employees, which would be our staff, any option for carrying that scholarship over to graduating students who might be apprenticed, do you know?
Well, they're not our staff, so right now they're Sodexo staff, and then they would, if they chose to transition, they would be Aramark staff. And are you speaking about the college tuition? And can you?
They're offering college scholarships to their staff that work at our schools. Any opportunity for scholarship for our students who might do apprenticeship?
We need to look into that. That was something we looked into with Sodexo about 5 years ago, and I believe that's considered a no-no because you're giving an actual cash prize. It could be construed, I believe there are rules prohibiting that. Question, I like it, but.
Any other questions around the food service bid?
Yeah, I wanted to ask, how is the nutrition of the offerings evaluated?
So, I don't think I could convey how regulated and regimented the menu offerings have to be in the National School Lunch Program, the school breakfast program, all of the programs that we offer. There are very, very strict regulations about the amount of calories. You can't provide too many calories. You have to provide a certain number of fruits and vegetables. You have to provide certain options. There has to be whole grains. There have to be so many grams of protein. There can only be so much sodium. There can only be so much sugar. So it's very, it's really thought out very well. So they have to make menus that are very compliant. You can't just say, kids might like beefy mac, I'll make some beefy mac today. It's when they come in and do an audit, which we get audited a lot, they come in and they're going to weigh the portion of beefy mac that you've made, and was it made with whole grain? And how do you know that that child got the 3 or 4 grams of protein that are supposed to be in that serving, but not too much cheese and not too much, it's very, very regulated, and they're very specific recipes. Yeah, so we have a dietitian that's part of the staffing that will be available to us. And so they'll use menus that they know are compliant. One of the things we get is an extra 9 cents per meal because we have, with Sodexo, we have demonstrated this, and Aramark has a record of doing this as well. They can verify, or they will say, they have said that their menus will meet their certification, no problem. So that's an extra 9 cents on every single meal that we sell in our cafeteria of reimbursement that we get. So it's important that they meet the requirements for our students' sakes, but also for the financial viability of the program.
Our cafeterias/kitchens all set up to accommodate this company without us having to buy new freezers, refrigerators, stoves, the whole thing?
Great question. So what I would say is we have invested, I don't have the exact dollar amount, but I would say easily $750,000 over the last 3 to 4 years, maybe even closer to $1 million in the dining areas and the kitchens that we have. So we've been able to do some really nice upgrades. And the reason we've been able to do those upgrades is that guarantee that we've had with Sodexo. That's what we're using that $300,000 a year to do, to make those kind of upgrades. So in terms of the shape that our kitchens are in, we have. I'm not saying there's nothing that needs replacing, but in general, we're in really good shape. Now, what we saw when we took a tour recently is we saw some equipment that I wasn't familiar with. I'm like, what's that thing do? And they're like, oh, that's our chopper. Well, we aren't currently doing very much from scratch cooking. So we're not using a chopper because we're not making salsa from scratch. When we have Taco Tuesday, we're using a product that is already prepared, perhaps. So I would think small tools and equipment we probably will need to enhance, but we've got the funds to do that, and it'll be good. Overall, our kitchens are in great shape, though.
So how much from scratch is there? I know that, like, when I hear about the student breakfasts, how much is the prepackaged, or is that not? Like, I know you guys talked about the freshness of the food, and
no, that's a big concern. The breakfast in particular, the packaged breakfast, is something that we've been talking about this past year. We saw some, but not a lot of change. And that was something in our pre-proposal conference. I said, the menus are going to be important, particularly the breakfast menu. Aramark really came through. I mean, they had a breakfast burrito. I don't really like, this is me personally, I don't really like, going to McDonald's and getting a breakfast, whatever. This thing, I was like, I've got a whole nother company that's coming in an hour, and we've got all but I just kept eating it was that good. It was amazing. And it was really good. And with whole eggs, they didn't use like preformed egg round shape on an English muffin kind of thing. So what I will say is, one of the things I did learn in sort of, I won't say defense of Sodexo, but just kind of part of their justification is, it is really hard to do breakfast in the classroom. You've got 15 minutes to feed every kid in the school, so it's a big challenge. Could we perhaps try and find 5 more minutes in the morning? I don't know how building administrators would feel about that, I don't. But we saw a lot more offerings, particularly at breakfast, that were from scratch. And I would say that when I say from scratch, like if they're doing chicken parm, they're not taking a raw chicken cutlet and, doing an egg wash, they're going to start with a chicken cutlet, but it's going to be whole muscle chicken. It's not going to be a preformed chicken patty. And then they're going to make the sauce, and then they're going to make pasta, and they're going to assemble that. So
They're doing this in our kitchens? In
Yes.
our kitchens?
yes.
Is this different? This is all totally new to me, so I don't, go ahead.
All of our food right now is prepared in our own kitchens. Every school has a kitchen, and we don't prepare centrally and ship it out. Every school prepares the meals for their kitchen, at least during the school year. Occasionally during summer school, if we're not teaching in a particular school, we might prepare meals at Easton Middle and ship them over here, something like that. But during the school year, they're all prepared on site. And one of the things we were really interested to see in these menus is just how much now, a hot dog is not really from scratch, there are
Fresh
things.
fruit or,
Yeah.
those packaged muffins that are so bad for you. Are we doing those?
We probably will, but they look better. I really fought this fight a lot this year. I'm like, we need more savory options. I'm tired of seeing the Mc French fry sticks or the French toast sticks, all those things. I'm tired of that. Sodexo heard, and they did respond, but I didn't feel like they responded the way, as fully as they should have. And we saw more exciting things on the other menus. So.
I think they said that they would have at least one hot offering
Every
breakfast, and that some of the packaged things would still exist because you almost have to in order to survive.
And some kids, I will say, what we hear too is for many kids, breakfast at school, thankfully, is second breakfast. It's not, they have had something at home, so it's second breakfast. And kids really enjoy cereal, and you think, oh gosh, they're eating Cocoa Puffs. But the Cocoa Puffs or whatever they're eating at school are not the Cocoa Puffs that might be in your cupboard because of those sugar limitations and the calorie limitations. So they're actually, even a Pop-Tart, it's a healthier version than what serving your kids, if you serve this to your kids. And they're surprisingly palatable.
And our culinary department thought it tasted good because those are the pros back there.
Yeah, what does Miss Brown say? I I want to know what Miss Brown says.
The breakfast burrito was amazing. Whatever. We started off with a bento box that was just, the hummus was delicious, fresh fruit in one corner, and they had made their own bread squares out of
Pita chips.
like focaccia bread or whatever that they had toasted, and the other square was vegetables. And it was so delicious that I took what I couldn't eat back to school and had it for lunch.
Oh, yeah, there was a lot of competition for the leftovers in this building, I will tell you.
I think what stuck out with me is when we were looking at the school menus that they're going to be given to the parents, they actually are marked with vegetarian, vegan, gluten-free, from scratch. All things on the menus are marked for them to know what they can get.
Yeah, it's very clear.
So it's you think it's a real improvement from Sodexo?
We think our scoring reflects, yes. I mean, please don't expect miracles on day one because they've got a trained staff. The staff is not used to preparing foods in this way. They're not used to all the chopping and the cooking from fresh. It's more, they're doing some of that now. And I will say, the team, 3 members of us just ate out at Easton High School about a week ago. We had a great lunch out there. And I mean, the prettiest whole blackberries you ever saw. So, I mean, I don't want you to think the kids have not been getting good options. They have, and we're very thankful to Sodexo. for the partnership we've had for the last 10 years. But I think Sodexo recognizes that they need to change their game a little bit. Their offerings for next year definitely were offering more from scratch, but we just felt like the menu and the capabilities of Aramark were superior.
Anybody else on culinary? No? All right, we'll move on to the next agenda item then, which is student promotion with Dr. Einhorn.
Good evening. This is a Good evening. This is a follow-up to our last board convening. I believe it was for our budget work session, and there were questions regarding summer school, which led to questions about retaining students and how do we meet student needs in order to make sure that all students are college and career ready. So the question was initially regarding retention. You'll see that this presentation is about promotion because the board actually has policy and administrative regulations regarding this topic. Policy 9.30, promotion and the accompanying AR outline our process for determining whether a student is promoted to the next grade, assigned, retained, also speaks to intervention. First thing I would like to concede is that this policy has not been updated in quite some time. Since Dr. Pepakayi has been on board in Talbot County Public Schools, she has made updating policy and administrative regulations a top priority for her cabinet members. We have asked that we allow this one to wait just a little bit longer because, as you know, Dr. Wright, who became our state superintendent from Mississippi, has been working with her staff diligently to make student reading and improvements in mathematics a focus of her administration. So her staff have been working with the state board and have recently passed a Maryland State Department of Education literacy policy that outlines strategies that impact what our policy was going to look like. So we did not want to bring it to you prematurely, only to have to bring it back once the state settled on those regulations. Within the state guidelines that we are now using to prepare a draft to bring to you probably in the next month or two, we are required to ensure that we are meeting certain specifications that are in the state policy. And this includes that any student who is not progressing in reading on grade level, K to 3, would have an individual student reading intervention plan, which we are calling SHRIPS. You'll start to hear that term. And this actually really aligns well with the board's focus this year in particular, but also the last 3 years in focusing on literacy outcomes for our youngest learners. So the SHRIPS are intended to be developed collaboratively, school, but also with families, to ensure that families are well aware and are involved in how we're working on meeting the needs of their students. Also within the state literacy policy is a component that students would need to demonstrate reading proficiency before promotion to 4th grade, so at the end of 3rd grade. One of the things the state was working out was what would be an approved screener to make that determination. And we are very fortunate that the one that we have been using and will continue to use is one that the state is supporting as well. So our DIBELS assessment is an approved screener. So we would continue looking at that data. While the state policy looks at retention of students in 3rd grade if they are not making sufficient progress in reading, there are several caveats to ensure that that decision is not made without being warranted and without many steps that are made in the process. The first of which is always going to be outlined in the student reading intervention plans. So we've been doing that in Talbot County, but not at the level that this is going to require that we are documenting all of our steps and also the level of family involvement in it. So that's a big shift that we are looking forward to seeing. The retention at the end of third grade is contingent upon the student having access to appropriate interventions, data, progress monitoring throughout. Again, strategies that Dr. Pepakai and this board have made a priority for the work that we've been doing. There is, for the retention at the end of third grade, a requirement that parents consent to that. And also, it has provisions for some good cause exemptions. For example, we would be looking at multilingual students. Are there any barriers where they may need some more time, but retaining them would not be appropriate? So if we look at the data, just what's been happening in Mississippi, they've seen some great results in student reading progress to grade 4, but they have not had a huge retention rate from that policy. So really, this is about putting all the steps in earlier before retaining a student.
Is Dibbles used statewide, or is that a county preference?
So districts have been using different screeners, and what the state literacy policy and their movement towards creating more structures around that has identified just a few screeners, and Dibbles is on there, so I expect we'll see more districts starting to use that. Again, we have some very smart people in the Department of Teaching and Learning who already recognized why that was the screener we wanted to be using for our students.
And this is from the governor's grant money. Is that am I remembering that correctly? Is it connected for the funding part?
So that is Dr. Wright's push to hire tutors across the state. Yes, there is funding for that.
Yeah, I asked Dr. Bell when we were doing that White Marsh thing, so I just wanted to make sure that I understood correctly.
Yes, because Dr. Wright's plan, again, is focused not on the retention piece, but more so, how are we being proactive to do all the right things for a student before we get to that space?
Will this new literacy policy affect changes to COMAR then?
So it has already, these changes have gone through the state board. They are on board with that. So again, we were waiting for all of those pieces, including what would be that universal screener, before we updated our policy to bring to you.
And that policy will now be pushed over to policy committee for updating?
That is correct. That's where it will start, just as all of our policy revisions go through that process. So-
Could you say more about the exemptions piece of it? I think I heard you say that if, say, the reason that someone was not yet proficient in reading was because of they were multilingual, that then they wouldn't, that might be an exemption. And I guess as I'm thinking that through, I'm thinking, that might really be a student who needs more time, to learn the language as well as learn to read, because if they don't know the language, then learning to read is very challenging.
Absolutely, and that's one of the things that I think is important to recognize with the shifts that the state is making, is that it's very much focused on what are the individual needs of that student. We know, even in our very old promotion policy, that there isn't a one-size-fits-all answer on how we help students learn. And so the state, in their work, has identified that there may be reasons why it's not in the best interest of a student to retain them, and that really needs to be part of a larger conversation that involves the educators, the parents, the reading specialists, to make sure that we are making the best decision for that student. Because research, way back when this policy was written, and still today, shows that the benefits of retention are not significant enough to outweigh the negative impact for most students when you retain, which is why no decision is made in isolation and really has to be supported with what have we done leading up to this point. We have some students, I met with a parent who said, my child's not reading. I'm concerned my child's not reading. And then we followed up couple of months later, and he's like, it clicked all of a sudden. So it's a process, and that's what that policy honors with that good cause exemption. And I apologize, I'm not outlining all of those pieces. That wasn't my intent tonight. That'll be part of the policy when it comes back. But I think for me, the most important piece is we are focusing on what's right for that student based on what their needs are, the interventions that have been provided, and what is our next right step in helping to support their success. So in our current AR, we do have criteria for promoting a student to the next grade. In K through 5, the primary focus is on reading and mathematics because we know the importance of those two areas for continued student success. In 6th through 8th grade, we look at students' progress in ELA, mathematics, and there are also 2 other components in the AR that in full disclosure, we really haven't focused on as much as the ELA and math, because they're often impacted by those 2 core content areas. And that is students who have a combined failing in social studies and science. They would be retained when this policy was originally written. And then also combined lack of success in the related arts. So our focus really has been in the ELA in math. One, considering budget, but also considering where do we have the most impact in ensuring long-term outcomes for students. In high school, it's different. Whether a student moves along is dependent on their credit count. A student remains when they enter in 9th grade, they stay with that cohort. But we do know that this is a guideline for how many credits they should earn each year in order to stay on track to graduate. A student who is not successful in a course makes up that course in one of several ways, and I'll share that as we go along through the presentation. But this is outlined in our current AR. We know that retention, again, is not backed by research in terms of being the most effective strategy for improving student learning outcomes. So we have taken the stance in Talbot County to be proactive, to try to ensure students don't have to be retained by the actions that we are taking to support their success. Many of these have been the work of this board to support. For example, we believe that our new teacher induction and the mentoring and coaching that our teachers are receiving helps make them better prepared to meet the many needs that students are bringing with them into the classroom. So that has been an important investment in improving teacher efficacy to meet the needs of students. We also know that the investment you've made in new curriculum adoptions, especially in reading and math, have made a significant difference in providing teachers with resources that allow them to differentiate and to provide more small group instruction by having materials available to try to reteach skills that students may not be learning the first time it's presented. This board and Dr. Pepakai have also made it a priority for us to focus on data and to progress monitor throughout the course of the school year. We no longer wait till the end of the course or the end of the year to determine which students need additional support. That is happening on an ongoing basis in our schools through their professional learning communities, through their work with their curriculum departments, looking at assessment data. We also know that focusing on our instructional process, the opportunity for reteaching, and the recommendation of the current grading committee to focus that reteaching on the formatives instead of the summatives during the instructional interval instead of after the end of a unit is one way that we believe we can even improve our current practices. And we also have, and I don't know why it's not on the slide, invested in professional learning, both in the science of reading, the science of learning, And we're also providing our teachers with teacher-directed learning through an online platform. So if they're working with a core group of students who are struggling mastering material, there are resources that they can engage with to better meet student needs. And the final thing I would say here from a district perspective is the investment in tutoring. Research shows that tutoring has a high effect rate in terms of improving student outcomes, much greater than summer school and some of the traditional practices we've had in place. And I think, Ms. Dobson, that's what you were referring to when we were with Dr. Wright. Mr. DeVerick was telling her about all the strategies they put in place, and she was very impressed with the tutoring and referenced how that truly is a high leverage strategy for ensuring students are on grade level. You've also heard from our elementary schools, but I wanted to outline for you some of the proactive strategies that we have in place at the schools to prevent retention of students and to keep them on grade level with their peers. Across the board in our district, our teachers are working on not only giving direct instruction to the whole class, but looking at their data, determining who needs more small group instruction. So we've seen more of that than we have in past years, and it's a skill that's continuing to grow. You've heard the elementary principals who've come and talk about K-2 reading, talk about the WIN, making sure that students have time during the day to receive interventions. Again, high leverage as opposed to some other options for intervention. The middle school has added an intervention block, and we were also able to purchase a reading intervention that was developmentally appropriate for students at that level. So the middle school students now have opportunities for interventions that they previously had not. And this year we did implement the flex period with the intent of ensuring that we are following that same model that we had seen effective at elementary, providing time during the school day for students to get what they need academically. We know anytime you implement something for the first time, there are improvements to be made, and we are already working on identifying what those are and making sure as we proceed next year that our programming for during the school day intervention is more robust for our 9th through 12th graders. We also have after-school programming at the elementary school. We have Level Up, that has been mentioned several times as effective for our middle schoolers, and we do have that corrective time at the end of the day for high school. I will concede that transportation is often a problem with that, and we've talked about that many times, being a barrier for some students. We also have a MTSS system in place, and we are currently working to ensure that that's even more formalized and effective for our students. This is a process where schools have teams that identify students who need additional support outside of the classroom. They're monitoring the data, and they're ensuring that they're working collaboratively, not just a classroom teacher, but a whole team of individuals to identify what that student needs.
I'm sorry, what does that stand for?
Multi-tiered systems of support. My apologies for not writing that out.
So I have a question about the flex period. Are they going to really look at that and see how this past year went and start to put students in groups now? Because I know there are students who need help, students who have dyslexia that have not been where they need to be, and they're, doing some other, I don't know, it just, I know for kids who don't have a place to go, because it was not great. So I was just wondering if you're doing those.
Yes, that is a high priority for us to work on because we want that time to be meaningful for students because it is taking time away from core instruction. Again, this first year, we knew this was a good strategy, and we said we can't wait to plan it out fully. So we implemented knowing that we were going to have to refine it. But we already had students this year who were able to get into a reading intervention at the high school level, which we previously never had the opportunity for them to do. And the board, we've requested an additional English teacher for Easton High School, and one of the reasons why is to make sure that we can open up more sections for more students to be able to access it as they need, because our data is showing really promising results even for high school students. So yes, I concede we have work to do, but again, I think our first year has shown us where we can make improvements. Year 2, is it going to be perfect? No, any change takes 3 to 5 years, but we knew we couldn't wait to do something at the high school level. I know a concern that often comes up is about credit recovery for students who are not successful, particularly at the middle and high school level. So we know we have the criteria for who would be eligible. So we do have opportunities for summer learning. The extent of that has been contingent upon overall budget requirements. And again, one of the things that we have shifted to, which has had an impact on how much summer learning we can offer, is more tutoring during the day. And again, that was based on research that shows the impact is greater with the in-time, in-school tutoring than it is with summer school. But we do still have summer learning opportunities for students. We do have some students who repeat courses. This is a little bit more difficult when you look at our elementary or middle school students, because often their coursework is based on their grade level. So if a student is struggling in ELA, but not in anything else, problematic to retain for that one area. So what we would look at, what supports do we put in the next year to ensure that student is continuing to make success? At the high school level, we do have semester 3 courses for our core content areas. Several years ago, we shifted from, well, it's been a long time now, a block schedule to year-long courses for ELA, mathematics. So a student may be unsuccessful in the year-long course, but could take a semester. So we call it semester 3, where they're just focusing on the material they didn't learn in the year-long course. This allows us to keep students on track for graduation, but also recognizes that they learned something in the year-long course. They're not coming in as an empty vessel. And that also goes with our Edmentum offering. We do have an online credit recovery for students. It is approved by the Maryland State Department of Education. We can't just pull something off the shelf and say this is what our students are going to do. It has to be approved. It is open for students who have failed the course. So again, students who have sat through an entire semester or a year-long course as a way for them to make up that credit and stay on course with their peers. I did try to take a look at some of the numbers because there is some narrative out there that we are just putting kids on Edmentum and everyone is doing Edmentum. And the numbers are actually pretty small between the two schools. In fact, proportionately, St. Michael's numbers are a little bit higher, and that's because their schedule is so tight. If a student fails English 12 first semester, they may not offer it again second semester. So we have students who do Edmentum for a variety of reasons, credit recovery, home hospital, that place them on there, but it's approximately, it's less than 5% of the overall credits that are earned that come through credit recovery on Edmentum for our students.
For all?
Yep, for credit recovery, yes. And again, there's a process for that to happen. It is not just a teacher who says a student's going to do it. It's not a building administrator. It's actually a team of individuals, including our student service office, because it does become part of our MTSS process to make sure we've done everything prior to that to support a student's success.
And that's just at the high school level, not 8th grade or below.
Correct.
And you said it's 5% countywide?
Approximately, yes. Yep.
Can you explain how the Edmentum works? Because, yeah, what we're hearing is they take the full course, they fail it, and they take a 2-week computer course, and they can pass for the year. So, Yeah, I don't think that's right, is it?
So a presentation on Edmentum could be a whole presentation in and of itself, but I think the important thing to remember is student does it for credit recovery. So they have sat through the course. You've taken English 9, and no student comes in not knowing, having any learning, right? So you might have a student who failed the course with a 52. Our current passing rate is a 60. So we're not going to have a student sit through the entire course again for that amount. They learned a good portion. We want them to learn a lot more. So through their process, through talking with student services, a decision is made that a student can do Edmentum. There are placement tests on there that determine what students haven't mastered, like where they need to start. Because again, a student in 9th grade may have learned character and all these other things, but they may be missing this part that they're working on. So the amount of time that students need for Edmentum, usually not 2 weeks, but it's really dependent on how much the student has missed and what they need to master. They can't move on until they show mastery of that piece, and also how much time they want to do it. We have some students who are very motivated by being able to do it online, and will actually put more effort into that than a traditional classroom. So they might be able to get through more material because they're devoting more time and effort to it, because for some reason that classroom experience didn't meet their
So they
needs.
take an assessment to see where they're weak? Is that what you were saying?
It places them in there, yes. And again, this would be a whole nother presentation about how it's used, but I did want to bring it up because that is an option that our students have at the high school level.
Do we have any rough idea of the number of students that are utilizing that program?
We do, and so we have a number of students. What I don't have, because I tried to gather this quickly, was the number of courses. So I have the number of unduplicated students who access Edmentum, but I don't have the actual number of courses. So that's something I can get for you.
Is Edmentum offered before the student would have an opportunity to retake the entire class at a different camp, like cross campus? Or like how does that work? I know you said it's a different, but in order to refute some of the negativity, can you speak to if, a class that a student fails first semester is not offered second semester, are they allowed to take it at St. Michael's or Easton before doing Edmentum?
So cross-campus is always an option for our students if they can fit it into their schedule. So that cross-campus is usually something that needs to be well-planned in advance. So it would be rare that someone would do that. We would probably use the option of Edmentum first, again, knowing that our students who fail a course, most of them have failed in a small range of failing because they've done some of the work, they've learned some of the material. So Edmentum would be an option rather than uprooting their entire schedule to have them go cross-campus.
And it's self-paced, I'm assuming.
Yes. And again, I hear a lot of people who have concerns about Edmentum. Again, I go back to it's state approved, and every district in the state of Maryland has to have an approved credit recovery option for their students. So this is the one we've selected from their options. If you're going to ask me what the others are, I don't know if I know what they are. But we also see this model being used for our highest achieving students, right? So there's a lot of negativity circulating, and I'm not quite sure why, around Edmentum for credit recovery. But we also have high-achieving students who are taking fully asynchronous college-level courses and earning college-level credit that way. So again, I just am curious if the same concerns or the same criticisms that get applied are applied there as well.
Are they part of our 5%? Do you know when you
The
did the
college
breakdown?
students?
Yeah, who are taking it?
No, that's a
Okay.
whole different. whole
Well, that's a
different option.
year-long course or a semester course,
At the
right?
college level?
Right.
No.
That's
It's self-
as short a course
It's
as,
self-paced, and some of them are advertised as much shorter than our regular classes. So how students are learning is changing across the country, right? Like, I'm a dinosaur in public education. I got all of my degrees by going to campus. I drove to College Park 2 nights a week for how many years to get my doctorate? There are now options for people to do it fully online, and they are learning as much, as well prepared, and much smarter than I am, right? Because I know people who are doing it. So how learning is happening for students is changing, and we really just want to have the full range of options to best meet student needs before we look at retention. Because again, the data shows that retention has negative impacts, including increasing a dropout rate. And that is something we certainly don't want for any of our children.
How much teacher oversight is in that Amentum, do you know? Is it strictly computerized?
We have someone here at the board office who works with students and works with schools. Whenever possible, if student is doing credit recovery during the school day for some reason, we try to place them in a classroom with a certified teacher or to have someone there who can help them, help support as needed.
So it's not completely independent, there is oversight.
Yes.
How will how will it impact our grading policy, is what I'm getting at, from the beginning? This literacy policy.
So I think actually the shifts that the grading committee has proposed for elementary will much better support this process, because we're going away from just a straight letter grade and looking more at competency-based. So we will be able to communicate to parents more effectively and more precisely where their students are in their learning. So I think their recommendations are actually well aligned with what's required here. So again, I always want to bring us back to what we say we believe and what our vision is for students. And for me, finding ways to be proactive to support students better ensures the board and our collective vision than just looking at how do we retain as kind of a consequence or punishment. Our focus is on the learning piece and ensuring that we are doing everything we can to support student success. And again, you will be seeing this policy come to you soon, so there will be more conversation around it, but I did want to answer just some of the concerns from the last meeting.
Anyone else have any questions in regards to this topic?
With that grading policy question I had, would you be willing to put that in writing? So that I'm sure it'll come up possibly Wednesday when we discuss our grading policy?
The fact that the elementary,
That it's more transparent, basically.
sure.
Okay, that is our last agenda item for tonight. So if there's no more questions, then we can make a motion to adjourn.
I make a motion to adjourn before 7 o'clock.
Second.
Okay, we're done for tonight, and we will see everyone back on Wednesday.